Hi, I'm Ken Ward, and here's my clicker.
It's you.
Oh look, that's me. Hello. I think as per the introduction, it sounds like a bit of a confession, but my name's Ken Ward and I am a recruiter. It's almost like an alcoholic's kind of confession to you. But I have been doing it for quite a while, 23 years. I should have got a proper job. About 10 years as a third-party headhunter, and then the last 13 years as a kind of pretty corporate recruiter. The last 8 years of that have been in kind of the startup world. My one takeaway actually from Cashes, and there were many, but my one important one is that, as you probably guessed, I am British, but I'm beginning to think I am only half British, because if you ask me how I am, I will tell you at length, and if you tell me how you are, I'll stop you because I don't give a shit. So maybe half British. So in terms of the company that where I am now, it's a company I co-founded 4 years ago, Wintercourt Consulting. And really, I guess, kind of our business model is working with either startup founders or scale-ups, typically where they've had some kind of financial event. That could be a startup with revenue, who knew, there can be some, but also maybe some kind of round of VC funding. So as I see it, typically they've gone through, most startups through various stages of development, which can be very easily simplified as we hire everyone we know, then we hire everyone they know, and then what the shit do we do next? When they have to kind of, particularly if you get money from a West Coast VC, he'll say, here's X million dollars, you need to grow by 300% by Monday at 4 o'clock. There's that kind of real pressure of growth around that. So after the last 4 years as a consultant, one telco we worked with last year with 30 employees when we joined 150 here in the UK, San Francisco, Hong Kong, Korea, Japan, Singapore. That's the kind of stuff we do. And typically we work in two kind of streams. We become the recruitment team for our clients, but on a contract basis, so kind of in the build stage. So we do everything from, and I'll go into this at some length in the rest of the presentation, you know, when you have a founder that has a killer interview question, and as a recruiter you're crying inside saying, please never ask that question again. Or it could be helping them to write job specifications, or all that kind of strategic kind of stuff, but at the same time doing all of the operational recruitment as well. So typically we're based just outside of London, but our clients are kind of global, our candidates are global, and all our interviews are done over video. So the kind of things I wanted to cover today, I wanted to talk about the startup recruitment life cycle, which I've alluded to already, kind of some do's and don'ts, so you actually have some takeaways from that, whether you're a recruiter or actually a hiring manager or whatever. But I wanted to broaden it out as well in terms of particularly around tech hiring, because that's a big thing for most startups, some myth busting around that, but also in terms of the future of recruiting, because how many of you are recruiters in the room? Okay, and how many, so I could ask how many are not, but how many are kind of hiring managers? Oh, only 3 of you. Oh. Who the hell are the rest of you? No, anyway, so cool. It was on a boat and there was beer, it was great around that. So that's the kind of stuff we're doing as well. So I kind of wanted to make it broader than just, you know, just too focused in terms of the granularity of startups around that. So here's the cycle, as I said, kind of hire everyone you know, right? And it's sensible when you're building a startup. You're hiring your friends, your colleagues, and everything else. The danger of this, of course, is that you hire people in your own image. And it's a danger in recruitment in general, not just in startup, but often you'll hire people from the same school, from the same university, you'll hire people from the same company you were at before. Kasia referred to this in her presentation, actually, that your culture as a company becomes the culture of another organisation. And often the cultural piece, and I'll refer to this in a little bit more depth later in the presentation, often is about actually, at the start at least, it's the shadow of the leader, right? So the founders of the company are going to set the tone, set the culture for that organisation. It will shift, it should and will evolve over the course of time, but at the start of that process, that's where it will come from. So then you hire everyone they know. These graphics are awesome, right? And that's how the organisation grows. But again, the danger of that is you've still got that kind of homogenous kind of organisation, everyone thinking the same, looking the same, sounding the same. You've all been there, right, as recruiters or non-recruiters. What do I do now? So here's kind of so I wanted to share some of my experiences in terms of working with startup founders, good and bad, and also kind of my experiences over the last 23 long years. I think that my first one to all of you, my advice to you is recruitment isn't easy. I say that because I get paid for it, but it isn't easy, right? So often I hear from startup clients, they underestimate the time it's going to take to hire people. I say to clients, and this is based on the UK, less so on the US, but you should budget maybe, so a client will say to me, I need an engineering team and I need it in 3 weeks' time. And I say, okay, cool, you should have told me 3 months ago. Because you won't get it in 3 weeks' time. Because I think of things in a kind of almost a triangle, a pyramid of cost, quality and speed. You can have two. If you want faster, it's going to cost you more. So again, in the startup world, of course, we're all trying to do things on the cheap, on low budget, but doing it well, you can only have two of those. But also actually deciding at the start, before you kick off a recruitment process, what does good look like? So many times you'll say, I want another John, or I want another Joan. Why? Is that what you need? The organisation presumably has moved on over the course of those 2 iterations of hiring everyone we know, hiring everyone they know. Is that what we need now? So be prepared to kind of revise your thinking. Don't be lazy about it, essentially. But this is the most important one. How do you assess it? So is it just on interview? Interviews are on their own, an imperfect method of assessment. We know that inherently. So the more you can add to that in terms of technical set testing, maybe some psychometric if appropriate, ability testing, there's all these other kind of things out there in addition to the obviously flawed referencing that you can do on a candidate. So I've been asked so many times over the years, can you get me a reference on this candidate? If I ask HR, they'll go, he worked here, she worked here from period X to period Y. We confirm that. Well, great. At least now I know they weren't in prison. But then my hiring manager, my CEO, will then say, yeah, but can you get me a real reference, like kind of, a sneaky reference that the HR people don't know about? Now, if I know the person giving the reference, yes, because that reference then has context. I trust the person giving the reference. But if I just look on LinkedIn and say, okay, so there seems to be someone that's connected to them, and I phone up and say, Kasia, hi, is Ken any good? And she'll say, yeah, he's good, but she could be my friend from London. She is my friend from London. But you don't know the context of it. So without that, it's meaningless. So don't believe all of the advice, apart from the advice I give you. So there's a lot of preconceptions, right? The kind of, if you read all the blogs, and Kasia's read them all apparently, poor girl. But if you read all of the blogs, particularly the ones that come out of the West Coast, Silicon Valley kind of stuff, it talks about things like hire A players, super smart people, hire superstars. But actually take a step back and say what's right for you. There's so many, particularly in technical hiring managers that have said, I want the people that are going to join our organisation that are either going to leave Facebook or Google or turn down Facebook or Google. It's been a pain in my whole recruitment career. There's one of my CTOs at a super growth company I worked with many years ago who said, as a recruiter, you'll obviously ask, even as a hiring manager, where are the people I want right now? Kasia referred to it earlier. She said, Google. Oh God, really? Which Google? Google Zurich. This is for London. This was news to me. I didn't even know they had an office in Zurich. So I went away and I mapped the whole of Google Zurich in terms of every employee in Zurich through LinkedIn and other sources, GitHub, etc., Stack Exchange, and then presented the evidence back saying, look, the people you want is not there. So don't rely on other people's perception. Often people say Google because we all know about apparently they only hire bright people and their interview process involved or used to involve questions about how many ping pong balls can you get on a bus and all these kind of bullshit questions. But actually you're relying upon their interview processes, not actually when they're good, whether they're good. In fact, many years ago I met a senior manager he was actually at Twitter, but it was ex-Google, and it was always bugged me, and I asked him the question, are those Google guys that good? Is anyone from Google, by the way? Good. And he said, look, as a manager, yeah, they are good, but the trouble often is that you'll have 5 guys around a table, mainly guys, who would have probably 6 or 7 PhDs between them. Often you will have the engineer that wrote the original framework for something, but none of the buggers can actually agree with each other because they're all experts in their subject and always have the best solution themselves. So actually you're over-hiring in trying to hire those things. I had one other CTO who was French, and when he first said it, I thought it was maybe kind of racist, but in his French to English translation. But he said, Ken, what we do not need is a Mexican army. I Googled that, nothing. But what he meant by that was don't overhire. You don't want too many senior people. You actually need people that are going to do the work. So when you think back in terms of, particularly around tech hiring, for instance, when you're presenting what the tech challenges are of your organisation, which is one of the most important things to attract technical candidates, be real, be authentic. Is your tech opportunity that challenging? If it's not, why are you trying for the double PhD? Because they're going to get as bored as shit within 3 months and leave. So be real. So this is kind of building on stuff, maybe not with the science and stuff that Kasia talked about, which I'm now going to have to go away and look up because I didn't understand most of it. No, I did. I think breaking down in terms of the values piece, this is what I found most effective in terms of building organisations. Outside of the functional stuff, and there was a question earlier in terms of what do we consider most important in terms of culture over functional experience. But I think I was working for one organisation that I grew from, I think, 30 to 250 over the course of a year, 2.5 years. And one of the founder employees who worked in our Norwegian office came over when we'd grown by about 300-400%. And he said, Ken, the thing you should be most proud of is it still feels like the same company. Yay me. But actually one of the reasons was that actually what was really, really central to our recruitment process is we had clearly identifiable values. And Kash has given a very effective definition of what those are. Don't overdo it. Any more than 4 or 5, you're overthinking, you're over-engineering. But then you can develop specific questions around testing those values, because ultimately what you want is not people who are all the same, who all think the same, but if they have this combination of values, that theme running between all of them, despite their functional experience, that's how you build an organisation. Because they're going to communicate in the right way, appropriate to your organisation. They're going to solve problems in the right way, appropriate to your organisation, and those kind of good things. That's how I've done it. Founder ego. How many founders? Okay, but you seem lovely, so it's not your problem. Look, one of the things so when I work with clients now, I have 2 tests. The first test is the CEO a dickhead? Because the role of the startup CEO does attract big egos. Arguably it has to, because they're the guys out on the road, they're attracting funding, selling the dream and all those kind of good things. But sometimes the perception that comes off the back of that is very unrealistic, both in terms of what their organisation is, what it will be. Of course, they're all going to IPO in 3 to 5 years, and they're going to be the next billion-dollar unicorn, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, of course. But that then changes their perception in terms of what good looks like for their own organisation. I had one CEO who, he said to me one morning, I got a message coming up at a calendar meeting saying, for a recruitment summit. I thought, shit, what the hell is a recruitment summit? I must be in so much trouble. But he'd read a recruitment blog from Silicon Valley, that just meant meeting. And he said, so Ken, what do you think is the most important part of the application process? And what's been very career limiting for me over the years, 2 things. One is my mouth, and 2 is my face. Not because of just how I look, but in terms of actually I have a very expressive face. So even when I think I'm saying something, yes, I totally agree with you, my face is saying something very different. So he said, what's the most important part of the application process? So I'm saying to him, you clearly have an opinion on this, why don't you tell me? And he said it's the cover letter. And I was, right. And he said, clearly you don't agree with me. And I said, right. And he said, do you read the cover letters? Yes, I read the cover letters. Well, how long do you take on them? I said, well, CV about 5 seconds, a cover letter about 2. Because mainly a cover letter, generally they're very formulaic, they don't add any value to the actual general application. But this goes back to the founder ego part. What he wanted on every application was, I don't think the phrase translates from English to Polish, to blow smoke up your ass, we covered this earlier, but he wanted flattery in every application. He wanted everyone to say how wonderful he was, how wonderful the organisation was, therefore kind of, that's why they should be hired in addition to their functional experience. Same guy, we were hiring as a recruitment team, an executive assistant for him. And he came down to the recruitment team office one day and he had a box. And he said, look at this. And again, expressive face, oh God, he's here again. And the CV was like a Barbie doll. Ken, Barbie. But it was a Barbie doll in a box, and the person that had sent that in had put her CV on the box, right, written out her CV. And on the doll inside that box, she'd written, I'm giving you away who it is if you check out my LinkedIn profile, but anyway, hey ho. It said Michael's next EA, and all that kind of stuff. He said, what do you think of that? Has she been an EA? can she do the work? But what he loved was that whole, both the flattery aspect of that, but also what he perceived as the most important value, arguably not, of the organisation was creativity. And he loved what he perceived as the creativity around someone that's going to write their CV on a box. But so the challenge often as a recruiter then, and definitely in my role on a day-to-day basis with startups, is trying to manage that ego, manage that expectation, bring it down, and maybe hold a mirror up in terms of the reality outside that. But clearly all startup founders are awesome, as they say in the States. Oh, I've gone back because I've got it upside down. And we're back. So this goes back to actually planning. Even in a startup, right? Because in startups we're scrappy. We're kind of, we do whatever we need to do to get, so we're execution focused. Plan, guys. So if you start out in kind of, and I'm not talking about in terms of super granular detail, but the very basics that you need to cover, right? So one of the things I often see in startups is a candidate will come through the door and they will see every damn person in the company, because it's really important, because we're all in, because of the impact that a candidate will make. And with 30 people and you're hiring somebody on the front desk reception and they've had 30 interviews, or whatever, I'm exaggerating clearly for arguably comedic effect. But one of the things around that actually that we need to focus on is, if you do think it's important to get as many stakeholders as opinion as possible in that process, from a candidate experience perspective, what can be really off-putting, and you possibly can relate to this yourself from your own interviewing experiences, they go through that process, they meet 7 people, and they've had 7 of exactly the same damn interview. To the point where the candidate's asking, do you guys actually talk to each other outside of this interview? Because I've been asked the same question 7 times. So my advice around that is, okay, so if you structure it properly, you go back to what is it we need to find out about this candidate, and you give each of those interviewers an area of focus. They can ask the hell what they like outside of that, but the feedback I'm going to request for them is on that specific area. And that could be functional experience, that could be if communication skills, whatever is appropriate to the role. So you give them that area to focus on. And it makes for a more well-rounded interview as well, so that you capture everything that's required, but at the same time actually a better experience for the candidate. One of the other challenges though is if you have a recruiter in your organisation, but it's ensuring that everybody that's talking to the candidate has a consistent message about what the organisation is, what it does. I'm not talking about brainwashing, but sometimes it's going back to what Kasia said earlier in terms of who are we, what is our future, what is our vision, what is our culture. You need to do a body of work before that to ensure that everyone not believes in some kind of cult-like kind of way, but actually there is consistency across that. Avoid spreadsheets, guys. They're a very I'm not going to go into a boring kind of software pitch for various kind of tools you can buy on the market, but actually you can get very basic and very effective and very cheap, startups, workflow management systems for recruitment. Invest. Because if you're doing it off of spreadsheets, you'll lose it. If you're doing it off emails, it goes into black holes. These workflow management systems, very simply, is really a top tip. You might think it's bullshit, but you capture all the information about a candidate, all the feedback in one place that everyone can access, so you get a full kind of view of the candidate. It's super important. One of the ones I like, I'm not sure Kasia does quite as much, is Workable, and I get no money from Workable, I hasten to add. It's workable.com. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's quite low, and it's very intuitive as well. That's the other thing I like about it. So have that process. Clearly, who has the responsibility for each stage of that recruitment process? Now, this is true of corporate, this is true of startup, but this is actually one of the things that I think is a repeated message in the stuff that I'm going to talk about across the next 12 minutes, is around actually having, this is back to basic stuff, really should be, but you need to get this shit right. So you have your stages, communicate these stages up front to a candidate. That's really powerful as well, right? If you have a website, whatever, put it on your website. This is how we assess people. So people that go into a process knowing what they're going to get, how long it's going to take, all those kind of stages, managing their expectations, that says a lot about your organisation too, that you give a shit. Because there's nothing worse as a candidate, and maybe you've been there too, that kind of, you've been through 5 interviews and then they say, yeah, but you haven't met the cleaner yet. Can you come back? And all that kind of stuff. And you're questioning, do these guys actually know what they want? Or do I have to meet their mum as well? Some organisations have asked them to meet their mum, but that's another story. I think what it comes down to, again, is to get the basics right? Treat everybody with respect. Now, I'm not being too HR about this, don't worry, because I'm clearly not an HR person. But actually treat the people, candidates, applications, whatever we're calling them, in the same way you'd want to be treated. However arrogant, however wonderful your startup is in terms of everyone should want to work there, duh, yeah, of course. But but actually treat people with respect. Because actually there is a, without again getting too HRy about employee brand and all that kind of good stuff, what you want is someone that you reject from your process is going away, I was rejected, but actually talking to their friend, to their brother, down the whatever, sister, you should try this organisation too because they're really cool. And the effect of that actually really does kind of go out like kind of ripples around a stone in a pond. So these are a couple of things, and they do apply in Poland, I've checked as well. So little kind of coaching tips around for the startup. Well, workinstartups.com, I think it's free advertising. It's a little bit clunky, but you do get some decent candidates from that. Less so over tech, but there's people that are attracted particularly to startup. You get a lot of people that are attracted from corporate to startup. There's some challenges around that culturally, arguably, as Kasia referred to, but always good to put stuff up there. Angel.co, that's AngelList basically, as you're probably aware, but that's the kind of, there is a recruitment board on there. And I think that's free actually, depending upon the size of your startup, on your revenue and turnover. And unicornhunt.io is another one as well, mainly focused on technical candidates, and it does operate here in Poland. These groups are really good as well. Tech startup jobs, Facebook, Twitter, all that kind of stuff. I think as Kasia emphasised a lot, it's community stuff, right? So I'm sure there are equivalent groups here in Poland specifically, whether it be on Facebook or whatever else, use them and use kind of the referrals from that. You'll get a lot of candidates from that kind of stuff. And network. Ask everyone you know. I think the biggest mistake people make is, I didn't know they were looking for a job. Doesn't matter. Ask your people within your organisation, who do you know that's good? It's a change in psychology, right? So that actually, if you have a recruiter whose job it is to do this, as long as you trust that the recruiter is going to treat your ex-colleagues, friends, family, whatever, with integrity and treat them well, then you give those names. So I don't know if Ken's looking for a job. He's always looking for a job, by the way. I don't know if Ken's looking for a job, but here's his email address, here's his phone number. Give him a call. He's good. He is good, and actually hit out and that kind of stuff. Now he might not be looking for a job, right? But if you contact him and you say, look, Kasia said phone you, blah blah blah. I'm not looking right now, but you've already got a trail of kind of authenticity. You've treated them well. You'll get passed on to another person. It's a really effective way of recruiting. Time consuming, but really effective around that. And of course, everyone you get referred to is, despite the lack of context, is kind of referenced at the same time. Also, because you're getting referred by people you trust. Meetups, events, I think, Daniel's covered this already. But small print. I guess if time is the one thing you don't have as a startup, if for those founders here, founder, and one over there I think as well, no, it's yours, wasn't it? Is hire a recruiter early. If you can. I'm not talking about a third-party recruiter. If you can get someone in whose sole responsibility is recruitment, if you are having some kind of spike, it's really important. It will make your lives an awful lot easier to do it well. So some of these are they're kind of obvious, but that doesn't mean they're not worth repeating. So the mistakes that we make, don't rush to hire. I'm not saying extend the process unnecessarily, but clearly if, as a technical manager, for instance, you've got a release coming up and you've got an engineering slot, actually you'll do your release more damage by hiring the wrong person than you will by hiring the right person. So if you have the doubts about the person for whatever reason, functional, cultural, or whatever, don't press ahead too early. Do trust your instincts. This may sound counterintuitive, right? In kind of an HR world, that you're not supposed to trust your gut. Hopefully black is slimming because my gut's getting considerably bigger since I've been over here. But actually, the one thing is that if you have a feel, I don't know what it is, this person is wrong. Okay, so trust that to an extent, and then look for the evidence in terms of why it was. What is it? And ultimately, it may come down to chemistry, right? So it's not looking at hiring for culture and all those kind of good things. It's not whether you like someone. It's not whether you want to go down the pub for someone. Yes, it potentially makes things easier, as Kasia said. But actually, the fact that you're working for 8, 10, 12 hours a day and coming back at the weekend, there has to be something that actually binds you together. Hopefully, it's the values and the culture focus that we discussed in the first place. But challenge your own instincts, but actually do trust them at the same time. Referred to this already, the don't overhire. Know what you want, what you need, and whether someone can grow into a role. As a rule, if there is a rule, what I always look for in hiring is, can a person do 70% of the role right now from day one? 30% is your attraction to a candidate in terms of learning and growth, right? Because when we take a new role, one of the things that typically, whether we be technical or whatever, any other discipline, is what am I going to learn? How am I going to grow in this role? So actually, one of the most common things that you hear as a recruiter is when I say, what do you want? I say, I want the developer or the marketing person who's working for the competitor that does exactly the same as we do, I want them to come and work here. And you go, why would they come here? Well, because we're great. Yeah, I get that. Why would they come here? Because we're going to pay them 2,000 more. Not enough. Because if they've been somewhere for 3, 4, 5 years, they'll have their own investment, emotional investment, their own kind of history, IP, effectively in that organisation as well. Leaving is a risk in itself. So if you break that down in terms of not over-hiring, so you're focusing on the 70% rule, so rather than focusing on hiring the person doing exactly the same thing as you want to fill that role, maybe their number 2 will be a more appropriate strategy. And really don't inflate job titles. We're so bad at this in startup, right? You've got a startup of 3 people and you've got a CTO. Now, so people say to me, okay, say in London, what's the market rate for a CTO? And it's anywhere between 25,000 and 200,000 sterling. What kind of CTO do you want? Is it a senior developer? Is it a technical manager, or is it the kind of CTO that hasn't programmed for about the last 10 or 15 years and sits in their ivory tower and goes on the news channel on TechCrunch or whatever? And companies will hire all variations on that theme, particularly often if they're getting West Coast VC money, they will often need to see a name on the board, CTO, actually, because that's part of the justification for more funding and more money around that. It's bullshit, in my honest opinion, but it is what it is. So if you can avoid that title over inflation, don't go for chief on any of it. You can go for head of. Because the danger, of course, is that as your startup grows, in 2 years' time, there's no guarantee that person's going to scale with that role over those 2 years. So the challenge you might be left with, you've got a CTO who's nowhere near chief anymore. So what are you going to do? You're going to hire a chief technical officer, or you might get into the situation where you're exiting from the business and getting all to that mess about options and buying them out and potentially the reputational damage done to you as an organisation. If you can avoid it, do. I understand at the same time there is a particular attraction to people joining startup about the big title as well as working for a startup, but it is what it is. Stick to your budget. This might seem obvious, right, in startup. Often we don't even have a budget, but stick to your budget as far as possible. Don't be tempted to go too far. But they worked for Google. I don't care. Particularly if they're coming from big company down into startup, they probably will have bigger benefits there. They probably will have a higher salary. But hey, we've got beanbags. Anyway. And we refer to this many times, right? One of the things we were really bad at as startup is, and I don't subscribe, you're relieved to hear, to the whole kind of mantra from the West Coast is fast fire, as they say it. But don't be afraid to fire. I think it's Cash's point actually in that around that is that actually, and I'm not going to put this as too much as a charitable endeavour, but actually if someone's not right in the role or they're not a good culture fit or whatever it is, long run you're kind of doing them a favour. You're helping them into kind of what is right for them, because nobody goes to work, hopefully, nobody goes to work wanting to do a bad job, right? But sometimes that is what happens, that's the reality. So don't be afraid to move them on, but do it in a professional way, do it with integrity, honesty and openness. And that's hard sometimes, right? And the thing about being a head of recruitment sometimes is the wrong title, because your role should be head of rejection. Because if you think about how many people are going to apply for a job, be interviewed for a job, and only one person's going to get the job, our job is to tell 9 people they haven't got the job, and we'll get shitty feedback from a hiring manager going, you're not a culture fit. And they go, what does that mean? I don't know. We just didn't want to tell you that you smell, or whatever it might be. And we have fired people for that before anyway. So this is the myth-busting bit. Okay, I'm vaguely on track. This is one of my big things, right? Kind of, you look at a lot of the products that are coming out, tech hiring being a big thing for us in startup world is, there's this kind of cult, I think, developed around engineer. You see that in terms of kind of phrases like war for talent, bullshit. You see this thing around the products that are developed for it. How many engineers, actually? You, sir, are awesome. The rest of them, less so. But the things about kind of, if you hear the phrase the war for talent over here as well, It originally came from a McKinsey report, which was misquoted actually, but it's now used as a justification for doing stupid things to hire more engineers, etc. Grossly oversimplifying. But in answer to the question, is this really true or is it part of the myth? I give you this gift that I'm particularly proud of around that, because it's not true. So if you do the hiring properly, in terms of, we'll get, oh no, there are 400,000 technical jobs and there are only 200,000 engineers. If you actually look at the source of that data in terms of where those 400,000 jobs come from, often it's recruitment agencies duplicating roles and all those kind of stuff. It's not realistic data. I get that technical hiring is difficult, but it's not maybe as war for talent bullshit phrase as appears on that. So be careful about that. Also, this is one of the things I absolutely hate. These again, I don't hate Americans. No, I don't hate Americans. Any Americans? No, anyway. But the things like the 10 times engineer, have you heard that phrase used before in startup world? It's the theory that an excellent engineer is 10 times more productive than an average engineer in varying scales, varying gradation beneath that. So therefore you should always hire the 10 times engineer, which is a bit of a myth in itself, I think. It's certainly, the underlying principles behind that are certainly obvious. A better engineer is better than a less good engineer, duh. But at the same time, I think so it goes back to hiring what you actually need for your organization. So if you're hiring those Google double PhDs and your technical challenges, it goes across every discipline actually, it's not just tech. If you're hiring double PhDs for a role that really would require a kind of master's at most, then what's going to happen in 3 months? If you persuaded them, if you lied to them to join you through your mastery of kind of marketing techniques, they're going to leave. And you're going to be left with the same problem again and again and again. This is one thing you see in engineering again, is what I call them is pissing contests in engineering particularly, where you have a hiring manager trying to prove how much more proficient they are than a candidate. If you are a recruiter, try and stamp on this straight away. Tortuous interview processes, tortuous technical tests that actually don't pull out and demonstrate the skills that you're looking to acquire. I had one French CTO that said the average for technical hiring in the UK and San Fran is we do an online test with candidates that the candidate generally would do about for 2 hours. I don't know if that's the same over here. But so they told me when this company I was working with that, yeah, it's 2 hours. And if I would sell the dream to a candidate, they would be great culturally. But of course, that doesn't matter for shit if they can't code. So before I present the CV to a hiring manager, I've got data. I've done all the stuff about values, but also I have a technical coding test to validate whether they can code as well. But I'd never get the coding test back, which is weird. I thought that was a really good interview. However, what I then discovered was the test to do well took 11 hours. So I said to my CTO, you know that your talent pipeline is beginning to become a talent puddle because who the hell has the time to do an 11-hour technical test? And he said, that's fine, because actually the engine it's so accurate in predicting the kind of talent I want that actually the people that go into that process, I'm prepared to wait. Now, as long as you get that in writing to say, right, you said that right, it's not me failing to deliver, that's fine. But actually, if you can manage against that, that's really effective. Because ultimately, it's the Google thing again, right? It's kind of, Google can get away with it because they're Google. Most of us aren't. So there's one product here that Casio actually likes, but I really hate. I won't tell you which one. Hired.com, is that Hired.com over here? No? So Hired.com is again coming out of Silicon Valley, where it's a database of apparently pre-selected technical candidates who you go on as a startup and you try and get them to talk to you by giving them very detailed information about your salaries and how much equity you're prepared to give them. And if they think they're ordained to send you their CV and agree to your interview request. Hired.com I refer to as Hoard.com, I don't like it as a product. Because equally, after doing that, you doing all the work, database search, even if you're not a recruiter, they still charge you 10%. Don't send that photo to Hung Lee. Anyway, and these other ones do the same kind of thing. They're making you do a lot of work, perpetuating that 10 times engineer, the cult of the engineer kind of stuff. It's actually very different. Another graphic that I'm particularly proud of. But so we refer to it in recruitment as the purple unicorn, the silver bullet. We're continually looking for things that, the purple squirrel is another one, that are not out there, even in terms of mixes of skills, availability, all those kind of good things. So what actually happens around this? I don't know if you've read about, there's a guy called Joel Spolsky who set up Stack Overflow and also Foggy Creek Software, I think. He's seen as a bit of kind of an influencer in terms of the environments that, and for non-technical people, this will become relevant as well. Don't worry, I'm going to talk to you as well in a minute. The environment's really important for a programmer, but it works on a myth, I think, that engineers are still the kind of introverted, unable to make eye contact, people you probably wouldn't trust with the children kind of thing, that kind of stereotype. The reality is in 2016, they're user-facing engineers that have to extract the same requirements and have the same, arguably, commercial skills that you or I would have to do that. So I think it's different. So a lot of these products, a lot of this kind of stuff is focusing on that myth, when the reality is all these things they're saying that engineers want, what we all want as employees. We all want to be treated with respect. We all want to be treated in nice environments. We all want to actually have the fact that we think the work that we do is important and we're listened to, all those kind of things. These are constants. This is nothing, in my opinion, is not about engineers. And that's how I brought it back to the rest of you, apart from the guy in row 4 who's an engineer. But not every employee, and there's a point to this. I did work for a startup that had a slide between 2 floors. Which is kind of, they kind of migrated, leveled up from beanbags. They had, to get from one floor to another, you went down a kind of water chute type slide. And that's the company that fired me, and they're going Chapter 11 in January. Fuck you. Sorry about that, to cut that out later. But the point being is a lot of these things are gimmicks, right? And when we go back to culture, we go back to values, often these things are seen to be culture. What a cool place to work, they've got a slide. If you think about Google, what a cool place Google is because it's got funky meeting rooms. That's environment, that's not culture. To back up Kash's point again. So I'll flip through this because I'm conscious of time. But actually, this is the stuff as well in terms of the future. We get bombarded with so much bullshit, so much buzz phrase. The buzz phrase of the moment and products that actually we're required to know about in order to solve these gaps in our knowledge. You know, you can see the migration. Maybe a year ago it was all about big data. Now it's about artificial intelligence and machine learning. I didn't go, but there's a massive tech conference which you can imagine is a bundle of laughs. HR Tech over in Chicago recently, where apparently every vendor over there was talking about the AI capability of their product. And it wasn't AI, right? It doesn't pass the Turing test in terms of consciousness around that. Arguably, it was machine learning at best. Arguably, it was an algorithm, and algorithms are inherently biased, in my opinion, because ultimately someone's got to put the rules-based learning in that in the first place. So all of these things are the kind of things as call yourself a thought leader. The quickest way to call yourself, to make yourself look like a jerk is call yourself a thought leader. Recruitment isn't broken. That's one of the perceptions that everyone makes. That's what all these products are trying to kind of generate in our mind. Recruitment's broken, and I've got the product that's going to fix it. It's not broken. We need to get better at it. And the way we need to get better at it is actually focusing on the basics. It's not the end. You know, if we don't hire artificial intelligence kind of stuff, actually, recruitment still will go on. We just need to get better at it. I think arguably, and this is towards the end, you'll be relieved to hear, I'll shut up in a minute, but part of this thing is that our product in recruitment is not nuts, it's not bolts, it's these squidgy, irritating bags of meat that we call people, who are unpredictable, who are emotional, who make decisions like, how could you possibly turn down my job because your dog's got a broken leg or whatever? That's what's important to them, and that's the real difficulty with our product in terms of recruitment. So we must get better. We must evaluate tools out there. Do they improve our process, or is it just we're buying a tool because that's the fashion and we think it's going to be a silver bullet to solve all our recruitment problems? If someone's telling you it's solving all their problems, be skeptical, because generally it isn't. Also, the people that you see up on stage, I think one of the other things is if they're selling something, an idea, be more discerning and challenging in terms of that. If you've got someone up there that's working for, the reason they get their conference speaking slot, I rarely get invited to conference speaking slots for obvious reasons, not the big ones anyway, but I'm too sweary. But the part of that is when they get up on stage, generally the reason they're up on stage is they're either selling something or they're looking for the next job. So that you might have case studies you can take away from that, right? Learn from it, but don't take it as read that everything you hear up there is Bible. Challenge it. You might be able to take away parts of it, but just because it's worked for SAP, is that going to work for your startup? So the big urge for you guys is actually be more discerning about these blogs, be more challenging, maybe not as skeptical as me because I'm skeptical about everything, but more in the sense of look for confirmation bias, look for kind of is there something they're trying to sell, all those kind of things. I think the Poles are probably as skeptical as the Brits in that anyway, but this is just kind of obvious advice up that. Towards the end, AI, this is the big thing in recruitment, right? AI is going to take away all of our jobs. It's actually going to automate everything. It's not actually true AI now. The rise actually where, as recruiters, you can do things relatively cheaply, which is really cool, is around things like chatbots that automate the really dull parts of the recruitment process in terms of diary arrangement, and there are products at the bottom like Maya, Julie Desk, etc. That for those recruiters in your room, you know how painful it is arranging interviews with 4 of your hiring managers, 1 candidate, all that kind of good stuff. This stuff can automate that straight away, which is awesome. Our job as recruiters, in my opinion, will not go away. The shit recruiters hopefully will, but there are parts of the process that can be automated and indeed should be automated. Using data in terms of predictive analytics, in terms of, right now they tell you products, there is predictive analytics out there that actually has the ability to predict when an employee is going to leave, down to their LinkedIn behavior and social. Not entirely believing of that just yet, but again, use data to inform your decisions. It's much more convincing with you talking to a hiring manager is not because I think that or because this beardy bloke on stage said it was important. Actually, I've looked through the data. I have the kind of employee data over the last 3 years, and we know something about that. Video interviewing, don't know if anyone does it. I'm not talking about Skype or Google Hangout. There are lots of video interviewing products out there. They're particularly useful in my mind for low level or volume jobs. So if you're hiring graduates, they're pretty cool because what they do is they automate that. So there's a standard interview. You don't even have to talk to a candidate to a certain extent, which is awesome. And actually they perform against certain questions consistently. It's well branded for you as a company, relatively cheap, etc. And what you as a recruiter or a hiring manager is you review the videos that come back. So particularly around that, no, not yet, I'm 41 minutes. That's why I'm talking even more quickly. Employer branding, I think you should cover that completely. But actually the one big takeaway about branding is employer branding for this purposes is as much as the challenge in recruitment is not identifying people. Anyone in the world can be found through their digital footprint, whatever it is, through the sourcing techniques that Cash is far more expert in than I am. The skill in recruitment is actually getting people to talk to you with authenticity. But equally, in the age of social, your disaffected employees will tell everyone, right? So, I always struggle with things like TripAdvisor when I see people that kind of will comment on a hotel in Lanzarote or whatever and say, well, that wasn't a 5-star hotel. And dude, when have you ever been to a 5-star hotel? So again, it's about context, right? So with that, but someone is shouting that your organisation's crap and you treat people about it, the way to deal with that is actually deal with it online. Actually address it in a professional way. Don't hopefully send assassins around, but that is also an option. So I'm just going to flick through this. So this is me on the weekend. But I think going back to, can you tell? No, but going back, I think this is the really important stuff. This is the back to basics stuff, right? And this is, I think, the final slide. Listen, 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them in that ratio. You might be surprised to hear me say that. Empathy is really, really important, right? Not just to your hiring managers, but also to your candidates. It's a build from listening, but understanding is really important. I think the future recruiter, which is also true of what the recruiter should have now, it's about relationships. Because you might not hire them now, but you will hire them in 2 years. Over the last 4 years of working on my own, I don't work on my own, there's 4 of us, but in terms of working on my own company, 95% of my clients have either been ex-colleagues or ex-candidates. So they already know what shit I'm going to talk about as well, which kind of de-risks working with me, I guess, for those guys. As a recruiter, be a true business partner. So I'm talking about using data. So it's not just about if you're just processing CVs and handing CVs across to the hiring manager, your job should be automated because you're adding no value. Above and beyond actually, whether it be this real skill in this, in my mind of a recruiter, is around selection. It's sourcing where to find a candidate, getting them to talk to you, and then presenting the right candidates to your hiring community. Blah, 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 blah. Questions and answers. We've got time. We've got 46 seconds. Go. Anyway, thank you. So my name's Ken Ward. You can find me on Twitter. Generally speaking, if you search on kward69, 69 is the year of my birth, nothing else moody around that. And I have to explain that sometimes for the younger children. But also, that's my Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff. Search on that. Be glad to connect. Thank you.
So, who's got questions?
Nobody. Good. Good night.
Okay.
Oh,
so,
no.
Video interviewing, one quick question. Have you ever tried it for senior roles to avoid asking candidates the same exact question over and over again? I'm wondering what candidates' attitude is towards that, because it seems like a good solution to the problem, but only if the target audience actually likes the solution.
I'm not sure I understand the question. If I can go back to what I think you're saying is, because I presented video interviewing where basically you as a candidate sit at home and the question pops up on the bottom of the screen saying whatever those questions might be, and then you have your countdown and you're looking at the camera and you have like your 30-second answer to the question. So my opinion is that that's very suited for lower level or higher volume roles. So I think Kash's question is, have I tried it, or do I think it would apply to maybe the kind of C-level or VP hiring? Is that right?
So exactly, considering that you can change the amount of time given to answer the questions, etc., the idea of a recorded video interview, would you ever try that with senior candidates to avoid asking them in for the same interview over and over?
No. Thank you. No, because I think if you've done your interview planning right, as I think I said earlier, in terms of she's drinking. But if you do your interview planning right in terms of actually making sure that each of the interviewers in that process are asking different questions and focusing on different areas, I don't think that's a problem in that same way. You weren't listening, were you? But yeah, no, you're wrong. Anyone else? Okay. Oh, hello.
My name is Alexandra. It hasn't really been on a plate yet, but I'm really wondering whether you had experience kind of hiring a couple of people to fill a group of positions in a team. I'm just thinking about a situation where there's a group of developers, for instance, who say like, we love to work together, we've been working for like 8 years together, desk to desk. And it's a perfect situation for a recruiter where they can just fill in 5 positions at a time. It's like checked. It's like a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
But then I have a strong opinion of that. But I'm just wondering whether others have any other.
I'm wondering what your opinion is now.
I have actually never recommended that as HRBP.
So I think
it's a huge risk on having impact in culture. But I only know one example. So I'm just wondering whether any of you have similar stories.
Yeah. So yes, I have. I think so. You're right to. I think you're right to be cautious because it's quite common to. That's almost like what they call an acqui-hire, effectively, where an organisation will go out and buy another organisation purely for their talent, right? Similar kind of analogy. But equally, if you hire me, you hire my mate as well, and awesome, great for us as recruiters. The danger, of course, is whether that is a precondition of hiring, or whether you have the chance as an organisation to assess the fit of both engineers in accordance with your values, culture and everything else as separate individuals, because there is clearly benefit to you as an organisation having engineers that already work together. However, if they're forming part of a wider body, a wider organism of all engineers, will they work as well with the wider group is equally important in my mind. So I would advise caution. It clearly is, as a recruiter, it's an easy solution, but I think there are some hidden dangers around that. And I've not done it, but I've been very cautious and I made sure that I've been diligent in terms of the processes that we've put in place. Does that answer your question?
It does, but I just feel like this really impacts the culture, the type of culture you have and you want to kind of have. And I was just wondering why no one brought that on the table and say about volume recruitment in this type of in the type of market where there's a shortage of talent, and this is a very quick way of solving something in a short term perspective.
But I think like for me, that's just it. That is a short-term solution, or it can be a short-term solution, right? So it really depends for me in terms of as an HRBP or as a recruiter or whatever, with two sides of the same coin, right? But except the recruiters are better. But arguably, it's kind of you know, what we're trying. Are we building an organisation or are we filling requisitions? Now, you're hiring, you know, I kind of referred to it flippantly, I think, earlier, as I do most things, but when a hiring manager says, right, I've got a release coming up in 2 months, so I need 4 engineers next week, and you're like, so you may think this inside, and depending upon the culture of your organisation, you may be able to express it, but when I was doing soft skills training courses when I was in banking, which were generally bullshit, but the one thing was around a time management course that actually the line they said was, don't let someone else's lack of planning become your crisis. Now, the argument is, as an HRBP, you do have some control, at least, hopefully, around actually the kind of requisition process, the hiring process. Now, if they have someone leave, or they have someone, God forbid, hit by a bus, then clearly that becomes more urgent and kind of unpredicted. But if they've known this software release is coming up, and they're hiring, you know, it becomes your problem because you're responsible for hiring, but actually, to my earlier point, rushing to hire can actually sometimes be a bigger problem than it's solving. So I think in terms of some organisations as well, it's if you know my kind of belief, my passion is about building organisations that I gave that example of kind of it still feels the same, mostly the same, even though being 300-400% bigger, and that's because we focused on the values and the culture in hiring. Now, it's a shortcut, absolutely. Now, arguably, if you have the revenue to the point where you're increasing your site or the budget that you're recruiting that quickly and need that many people, then perhaps contractors or freelancers is a better solution. Because again, it gives you the short-term fix in terms of skills, and you have to worry, but you have to worry less about the longer term culture that you're the guardian of as an HRBP, maybe.
Cool. Thanks.
Very welcome.
So one last question, okay?
Oh, it's an engineering question. Oh God. I can't read Java. Sorry.
Not an engineering question. You said to hire recruitment manager early. How early? How big company usually are to hire, and why?
Because we're also about it and you're not. No, there's part of it. It's like, so recruitment is part of all of your jobs, arguably, in any startup, in any organisation, right? However, you also have day jobs. Now, the danger is when the focus on recruitment becomes bigger than your ability to do your day job, then there's something is, you know, the tipping point has been reached almost. So I don't think there's an exact number of size of organisation or speed of hiring trajectory or number of open positions, etc. But you'll kind of know. I mean, if you don't like hiring full stop, then that'll be one open position. But if you find yourself kind of spending more than half your day interviewing bullshit candidates because you've had no one able to filter those for you, then it feels like that's when you should be getting a hiring person in. You know, when I talked through those stages of startup kind of evolution of hire everyone you know, everyone they know, etc. It's generally when you're getting past that, I would think, when the clear need for a recruiter becomes apparent. Because before that, I think kind of it's a kind of, you know, as much as I never describe myself as a luxury, particularly to my clients, but it would be a bit more of a luxury, I think, earlier than that. It's when you actively need to go to market. You know, I think, you know, you see people, you see CEOs scouring LinkedIn and all that kind of good stuff, engineers scouring LinkedIn and all that kind of good stuff. You've got a software release to do, you know, in the next sprint or whatever. Then, so it's a bit of a vague answer, but hopefully that gives you a bit of a feel for it. Maybe. Cool.
Okay, I have probably last question.
Have you?
Should companies pay for referrals? What do you think? Like, should the money be a factor to encourage people to?
I think that's two different questions. Should companies pay for referrals? I would argue yes. How they pay, whether that be monetary or in other forms, Kasia and I had this conversation actually earlier, funnily enough. I think it's that's debatable. I think actually whether you're awarding an individual or whether you're awarding a team for those kind of referrals, you can actually broaden it out so that it's actually a collective responsibility to, you know, hire outside of around that, rather than saying, you know, I've seen certain ways that people do it is that if you don't get and there's other tax implications behind this, but there was one company that was quite famous a few years back, I forget the one, but where rather than getting X hundred euro or whatever, you had a raffle ticket. And at the Christmas party, they did a draw, and the prize was a car that had sat in the reception. I mean, clearly for most startups, this is out of the question. But you can do something like that. You can do it around actually the team that has the most referrals has an extra day's vacation, or they have, you know, a team building event, or they have whatever it might be, or they can take the afternoon off or whatever. It doesn't have to be monetary. But interestingly, I think studies show, I hate the phrase study show because I can't remember the reference, but there is a reference to this if you Google it, that the monetary amount that you give for referrals, actually there is no increase in referrals if you pay 500 euro against 1,000 euro. It's not the monetary amount itself it's cultural. It's actually cultural. And actually the one thing about referrals, just one more, is actually it's a change in philosophy around when people give referrals. It's not who do you know is looking, it's who do you know is good. I kind of hinted at it earlier, so that if you have the ability either through an HR person, recruiter, or you yourself actually to reach out to people that you just know they're good, rather than you know they're looking, because there's nothing more frustrating, particularly in situations in the past where I've had to use a recruitment agency. I'm sorry, I confess. But you know, somebody turns up at Monday morning where particularly I paid a £5,000 or £6,000 fee, and the first thing they go, "Hey John, you know him?" And he goes, "Yeah, I used to work with him." Then why didn't you tell me? And I could have given you 500 euro. I didn't know he was looking. So, you know, you have to change the psychology of your organisation in terms of also almost making all of you recruiters, in that sense, who's good and who would fit, and approach them. But you don't have to stalk them and kind of, you know, hit them with a job and saying, "Look, we're hiring, we'd love to get you involved, will you come for a coffee," or whatever. So, not an answer to your question. Never ask a recruiter a short question. Does that answer you?
It's the answer.
Correct.
So I think that's it. That was wonderful. Thank you, Ken. That was great.
Oh, hello. That better be alcohol.
Thank you.
Leave.
Thank you.